Okay, hi everybody. I'm the UKPI on the CINUK project, and I was going to talk just a little bit about how this came about. This is the result of years of, conversations over the years with friends about food, right? And food, and what's your favorite food, and what's your favorite recipe, and learning over the years about, all of the sort of holistic ideas about food, where it's like 20 years ago, I remember being amazed that fish caught in different rivers taste differently, and the elaborate knowledge systems and frameworks and intricacies of Inuksijut, of Inuit country food, so then when this project, and Amy and I have had these discussions as well, and mutual discussions in different communities that we've worked in, and so when this project was advertised, we called up our friends in various communities, and Jean joined us, and Peter eventually joined us, and then the team kind of grew, and we had a lot of meetings and everything to figure out what we would put in the research grant proposal, and the ways in which we map out our methodologies and everything. But working with food is it's animals, right? And they're moving and environments, and so it becomes a part of a larger relational ecology, both of humans and animals in places north and south, and so we have been elaborating our methodology constantly, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And so I'm going to pass it over to Amy. And then I'm going to come back, and then Amy's going to come back.
Hi everyone, thanks for having us. My name is Amy Coffey. I'm a Canadian. My family are settlers in Canada of Irish and Scottish descent. I live in Iqaluit in Nunavut, homeland of Nunavut Inuit, of course. I've had the privilege of living in Iqaluit in Nunavut for the past 20 years. And mostly worked with the Department of Health with the Nunavut government. I'm a public health nutritionist, and a lot of my work and research and community work has centered on talking with people, mostly Inuit women, about food and about health related to food and to food systems. So this is where most of my learning about country food and nutrition and really what impacts human health in Nunavut has come from, is my learning from Inuit communities. So I wanted to just lay a bit of groundwork, and we've heard some of these things yesterday, but I wanted to just go over this as background to our project. And I'd also just like to acknowledge Peter and Jean and thank them for their contributions to this presentation, but also they're part of the Inuksijut team. So it's no surprise to anyone in this room, and especially to Inuit in this room, that country food and harvesting are central to Inuit culture, community, and well-being. And this has been well articulated by many Inuit organizations, including the Piikitani Inuit Association in their report called Food Sovereignty and Harvesting. And this, I think, was very much a landmark report when we started moving from talking about food security to food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is more when people define their own food systems. Food sovereignty includes knowledge systems that go along with food. It includes language. It includes economies. So this is a very holistic way of looking at food. Research has shown that country food is critical to both good nutrition and to food security for Inuit communities in Nunavut. So we know that on days when people consume country food, they're more well nourished in a range of important vitamins we associate with good health than on days when they don't eat country food. So intakes of things like iron and protein, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin D are higher on days when people eat country food. We also know on days that people eat country food their intakes of things like sodium and saturated fat are lower. And this is very critical, as many of you know, when we think about not only infectious disease, but chronic diseases. So diseases that people have for a long time, like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and things like that, that have a great burden on communities and on families and on people. We know that this is also true across the lifespan, and this is a really key point. So country food is a critical contributor to nutrients for adults and for children. We also know that most households in Nunavut are food insecure, and Catherine discussed this yesterday. We know that in Canada, Inuit communities in Nunavut experience the highest rate of food insecurity, and that Inuit communities in Nunavut, in fact, have the highest documented incidence of food security out of North American Indigenous peoples. This also represents an important dual burden because food security is combined with something we call the nutrition transition. So the nutrition transition is a very broad way to describe the movement from mostly eating country food to eating less country food and more store-bought food. So that movement where country food represents less of energy and intake of food, along with food insecurity, this is what we call this dual nutrition burden. It's been described as. So really a double whammy on health and well-being. But very importantly, and the real focus of this project, is that along with these challenges come incredible strengths within Inuit food systems, and particular within country food. So just a few of the images on the left. We know that there are challenges related to food safety, such as we've experienced botulism outbreaks in Nunavut. We have a lot of work going on looking at environmental contaminants like methylmercury, and long-range contaminants that don't actually come largely from the Arctic, but end up in the Arctic. But we also have incredible strengths. And one very good example of that is on the right-hand side, which is walrus. So a challenge we have with walrus is that 5 to 10% of walruses are infected with a parasite called trichinella. And we have a program in Nunavut through the Nunavut Research Institute, Nunavut Tungavik, and the health department that tests walrus tongues for trichinella. And if the walrus is negative for trichinella, then it can be eaten fermented or uncooked. And this is walrus soup at the bottom. The big thing about walrus is it's a very large animal and it feeds a lot of people, and it's delicious. So this is a good example, I think, of how there are challenges that can be addressed and how communities are using country food for the benefit of food sovereignty and for the benefit of nutrition, because walrus is also high in a lot of those nutrients that we are concerned with people getting enough of. And perhaps the most important, again, not a surprise to many in this room, the impacts of country food consumption and harvesting on well-being and things we associate often with positive mental health are significant. So this is Martha Jaw, who is a part of our research team in Kingyate. And Martha said a few weeks ago when Peter and I were visiting, when I eat my country food, I get more alive. It makes me whole. And really, I think this is where the basic philosophy of our research program began.
Okay, so we've assembled this team, and the team has grown. New people join, it seems, all the time. And these are some of the members of our team here. And all of us have lots of different things in common, of course. but one is a real love for country food and the ability to talk about it forever, right? A real interest in ways in which, but everybody from a different angle, it seems. So that's us there, and we've come together in different ways, and largely over a different types of aims and objectives, which alter and change. One is documenting Inuit knowledge around country food. Not just, we're not using cooking that much because it's butchering, it's freezing, it's drying, it's fermenting, but it's food preparation more generally. But then with every time you sit down or stand up to do these sorts of things, there's of course all kinds of different stories and pertinent information about food systems more generally. And we have an eye to different projects, and different members have different ideas. One of which is legacy cookbooks, and both in video form, but also in cookbook form, where these might remain and as part of community archives and community resources, but also provide a learning tool for people outside the Arctic to understand the intricacies and nuances of Inuit cuisine. The second element in AIM is advocating for food sovereignty and sovereignty over Inuit food systems, which I'll talk about in a minute. And third is just the ability to come together, seeing and understanding that we're working as a team of intellectuals and scholars and enthusiasts coming from a range of different backgrounds, and coming together over this love of country food, but also bringing together different knowledge systems that are seen as equal knowledge systems, obviously, where we can share and learn from each other in different ways. And it allows us to think about food conceptually as something that's interesting. So we have all kinds of different methods and processes. Largely we relied on digital storytelling, and that was part of our original research plan, recording country food processing and preparations, and we had ideas of, and we're still working on these video master classes or that are developed and devised by obviously the teachers, the cooks, and are taking all kinds of different formats. There's of course, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, different forms of pedagogy across different cultures, different forms of teaching and learning by seeing and learning by showing and learning by listening is something that video technology can work quite well with because it's less didactic. So we've both, and this research approach has changed. It's changing all the time, but it's part of an ongoing collaborative process where we think through different ways in which to undertake the research. So coming together, we did previous research with people in Arviat last year, which we reported upon at last year's meeting. So this talk, we're just going to talk about Kingait and Mitimatalik, which began with a lot of planning over the phone and through Facebook messaging and everything else, and then a series of meetings that were held to identify community goals and thinking about different teams we might assemble, both teams of knowledge holders who might have something to share and were free, and at the particular periods where we were having sort of intensive documentation, but also youth as well. Right, yeah. So this was done through community radio. In both communities, we those of us who weren't from the community went to elders teas and presented our research in Mitimatalik. There was an equivalent of sort of a feast in Kingait. There were phone calls and Facebook and posters and different things like that, and being quite clear that we would be recording with these A53 cameras. This is Rhoda here, Katsak, who directs everything in Mitimatalik.
Ooh, Rhoda!
Yeah, Rhoda! She organizes everything, including both our approach, our methods, who we're gonna talk to, how it's gonna happen, when we go, the seasons that we go, it depends on Rhoda's, when she thinks it'd be a good time to go, and how long we're staying and everything else. And we're working on a toolkit with Rhoda's involvement, which we're also gonna talk about in a minute. And through that, there is a youth element to it, youth digital research and different forms of training that is made available, and it's also, we went to Ikarvik, right? We talked to people at Ikarvik. Where are you, Michael? I heard you there. We talked to Michael and his buddies at Ikarvik. We also went to the elders. This is Aaron Kulat in Kingite, but we've been reaching out to youth. But there's not just one training package, right? Because each individual has a different idea of how they want to be trained in and what's useful for themselves, their families, the community, what people's interests are and everything. So there's all kinds of different training packages that we've been working with, and different members of the team have been doing that. Elders, of course, cooking training, but Peter with video training, Jessica Penny with interview training. So this is key to our approach, which is bringing Inuit pedagogy, Inuit ways of learning and understanding into research practice, which from what I've come to understand and spoken about with people over the years, and is a more respectful way of not imposing your own will on people to teach me something, but instead waiting for people to understand what you need to learn, and watching and being aware of the surroundings and being patient and understanding. So elders, this is taken as a given that elders will assess what you need to learn, and then you learn it. Pay attention and be quiet and listen and watch, right? And this is something that's discussed a lot. In all kinds of different venues, but it's being attuned to what's happening in the moment. And here's Vuriak Pudlat and Nivi Jaw, who's learning how to skin a goose. But it's also, I'm trying to say here, being attuned to what I'm calling the relational ecologies of communities, right? Where things are always shifting and changing. And so arriving in a community and saying, okay, we're gonna do this now, like tomorrow, you have to be quiet for a little while and understand what's happening, and take your lead from the people who know what's going on, and what type of research at that particular moment in time is most appropriate. And it might not be calling people up for interviews, and it might just be watching or being, so you wait and watch and think. And so this is the next two sections that we're going to talk about. So in the spring, it was clear that there was emerging community concerns about the risk of zoonotic diseases. And in both cases of our spring and fall research, we adjusted our work in according to what we were being told we should research. And so while we had all the tech and training and everything available for these cooking videos and feasts, Martha Jaw was very much responding in her advice with us to what to do, and people coming along to respond to community identified food safety concerns. And Amy's going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to move on to that same spring. Then we went from Kingite to Mitimatalik, and that was Peter and I, and along with Jessica Penny, and who couldn't come but wanted to come, and sort of I'm going to mention Jessica in a second. And when we got to Mitimatalik, we had actually planned this research specifically at a time that Rhoda asked us to come, and this was specifically at a time where there were to be a lot of narwhal. And we were going to record a whole bunch of different narwhal hunting recipes and feasts and all kinds of different things like that, and it had been planned. And so our everything around our work had been planned to that specific 2-week, 3-week period of intensive digital storytelling. And what happened, of course, when we got there was that there were no narwhal, and the narwhal, two of the narwhal pods had moved and weren't calving in that same area. And I think Michael could actually talk way better and way more about this than I can. So we shifted our research and moved. We did do some filming of cooking seal and fish and things like that. But this then became digital storytelling through interviews around country food systems and threats to food systems and wildlife safety and wildlife health more generally. So Jessica Penny's a sociologist. A lot of people know Jessica in the room. She's from Nunatsiavut, and she was interviewing various different community elders. And here she is with Jaco Alalu, and we're talking about narwhal and threats to hunting. So with this project having shifted in both places in different ways, or maybe not shifted, just morphed and evolved in both places. The UK team, which is Peter and I, went back and we were hard at work creating all kinds of different community resources, which we had decided alongside Rhoda and everybody that this would be quite useful. One was a set of banners, and this was done partially with another research project with Gut Health, and Amy worked with one of Amy's projects, which you can talk about. So we have banners that people were really happy about, and different cookbooks. This is Rhoda's favorite recipe, CINUK, so seals and different recipe books that are brought back to Mitimatilik and Kingite, and videos and all kinds of different things, so that we could then share and get feedback and translate them after the feedback. So while this was going on in the Aberdeen-based research, we had Mitimatilik community-led research, and Rhoda and her family with the Samsung cameras were documenting hunting and butchering and drying and fermenting. Her husband Joshua Katzak got involved, Jabez Katzak got involved, because animals are always moving, so field work on cooking and on food, you have to be really mobile, and so this was, the families took over, and then all kinds of different products were made. So when we returned then in the autumn, in October, this is Rhoda, and she's holding up fermented narwhal blubber, and there was narwhal around, which was great, so you know, we were able to do different stuff with narwhal, and Rhoda was really happy about that. We were reviewing community materials, but the particular 2 weeks that I was there was in the backdrop of various different, and I think that, Michael, you were at some of them, but different QIA, Nunavut Impact Review Boards, there was all kinds of different things going on in the community, community consultations about wildlife health and endangered species, and so this created a different tone to the October work, where we were focusing on broader aspects about threats to food systems more generally, because that was in the air, right? And although we, and a lot of this was then spurred, and this is my final and probably strongest point, is this consultation on the status of endangered wildlife in Canada, the COSOWID. So I had learned about this from Sheila Katzak, who I've worked with for a long time, just from a tweet. This is Sheila Katzak's tweet, and this was 2 days before I got there, but it's, she's asking about COSOWID assessments, including Indigenous traditional knowledge and local ecological knowledge, right? So this is a consultation which was put out just a week previous to us arriving, that has to do with putting seals on the endangered species, or species at risk list. So this became really interesting. Our conversations with Sheila in particular became really interesting, because one of the problems, from what we understood it, was that the online survey is, first of all, really hard to find. If you look it up under consult.
No, survey, if you look up on survey, it doesn't appear, but if you do it on consultation, it will.
That's right, yeah. So all of these different web searches, you can't find it as a survey, you have to use the word consultation, ring seal consultation. And then you get, so it felt buried, I don't know if it was, but it felt buried, and then you get to the site. The information about the survey, consultation, is in English, Inuktitut in French, but the actual forms are online, and largely invite you to fill in these online forms in English. So this was interpreted as I think I have the line up in the previous slide, which is a lot of the discussions with Sheila and with other people was to do with literacy, or now what we would call digital literacy, as part of the colonization process. And this is a long-standing discussion for scholars of colonialism in terms of literacy, colonialism, and the pen is mightier than the sword, a form of intellectual colonialism, and that is the ways in which it was being expressed with Sheila and various of the hunters who were saying, well, how are we going to fill this out? So we got in touch with Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and they said that we could, Sheila and I, and we could do a feedback in video form. But then she also was quite keen and went about a series of very pointed discussions with hunters in town. Sheila, the research team, Sheila and Samantha, her baby, who invoiced Sheila and Samantha. And so Sheila and Samantha, the team, which was more of an advocacy research, and this is Moses Kunark, but there were various other individuals who were interviewed, beginning with the Cossawick and then more generally about hunting rights and food sovereignty and seals and the importance of seals. And this led to a lot of really interesting and very impassioned discussions, which we're now working on together, because the deadline for the Cossawick consultation is the 22nd of January. Rhoda was also involved. She interviewed her husband, Josh Katzak. So there's some translations which are happening, but there's also video clips and there's bigger films that are going to happen, and there's also the survey that's going to be filled out, but there's also going to be various challenges to that with syllabics and things. So this is what's happening over the next month. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about the work that's happening in Kingaid, which is formerly called Cape Dorset, on the south part of Baffin Island, for those who are familiar. So during our ongoing work with Kingaid, there are several, I guess not emerging, but some really current issues that are happening in the community that were relevant to this work. So this fall, definitely what Nancy just spoke about, the species at risk around ring seal, was a concern. In Kingaid, the community water systems were disrupted because the holding tank was malfunctioning and there were restrictions on water use, which if you work in public health is never a good thing. We don't want people to use less water. We have this ongoing food security, and what was very evident when we were involved, when we were visiting the community this fall, were a lot of discussions and over housing and overcrowding and the relationships between crowding and food insecurity. And those are very real and something that our project is exploring more. However, we had a lot of work done on walrus and drying fish and bannock making. So one of the things that we finalized in the fall was addressing avian influenza risk messaging. And we have developed a YouTube video that features Martha Jaw, who's our lead in Kingaid, talking about how preparing and handling geese has evolved because of avian influenza. So talking about things like wearing gloves while butchering geese, which is new. Talking about cooking all parts of the geese and not eating it rare, which is also new. So these are pretty big changes and big messaging for the community. This picture, you can see a goose head being boiled with some other parts of the goose. So people enjoy all parts of the goose, and having all parts of the goose cooked is important in the face of things like avian influenza. So that, of course, led to a lot of discussions on change and changes in the environment and what that means for the Nunavut Government Department of Health. So this is one of the users of this information as well, because the government's, in Nunavut, the government of Nunavut is responsible for public health messaging. So if something is not safe to eat or drink or breathe, that is a message that the government is responsible for. And really, the responsibility for this lies within, for zoonotic disease lies within the Public Health Act. So supporting and collaborating with colleagues at the Department of Health was very important on this. So we talked, Martha talked a great deal about fermenting. So this is the walrus flippers that she was discussing fermenting, using her mother's kulik, and we have, we're now working on the translations of those because much of our research starts out in E92. This is, we documented cutting up walrus ribs to make walrus soup and talked a lot about how walrus are used for feeding many people. And if you've never seen a walrus rib, it's an enormous piece of meat that feeds a stew for about 20 people. So we had a lot of discussions about the importance of walrus in terms of quantities of food. We shared some work that was done in the spring on fermenting fish heads in beluga blubber. We talked about methods for soaking fish in seawater before drying it and documenting those practices. So just really to reiterate what Nancy had discussed, when we're in communities, working with communities on this research and working within our research team, being flexible and responsive to community identified priorities is a really, I think, a real advantage and a real positive about research that supports community members to be leaders in the research. So I think that's something that is important and a real plus that the CINUK program allows for that to happen. And then the advocacy work was a very key theme of our work this year.
Okay, so just briefly then, next steps is we'll there's a team, I think, that will be at the One Health conference in Calloway coming up. We are hoping Jessica Penny is the advocacy lead, and there's talks about the UN. Jessica was just at the UN Food Summit. This is a metaphor because Rhoda was experimenting with pickled narwhal maktab in October, and it took a few days for it to ferment and pickle, and then we got to eat it, and that's kind of what's happening here with some of the plans that we have, and because the plans are to do with the ways in which some of this work might be of benefit both to the community but also in more international settings in terms of advocating for food sovereignty, food systems, a proper recognition of CINUK as a system of knowledge, as a food source, as with proper support that's required. Key to this is the Inuit Food Sovereignty Toolkit, which is what the extra funding that was provided is where it's been going into, and this is a project that's been led by Jessica Penny, and she was at the UN Global Indigenous Youth Forum in Rome in October, and has been making connections and thinking through all kinds of different elements of this toolkit. This began with these small little pamphlets that we created with people in communities. Hunter's interviews, these are Jessica's interviews with health practitioners, digital storytelling, social media, right? So we have a series of these nice little pamphlets that we were working on with people while we were there. And this is all coming together into something that will be free, widely distributed, PDF and written and text form. Generally one of some sort of resource that's more broad and more general. And I think you'll be hearing about that a little bit more with that. And then finally, just to conclude then, in terms of results and how we are measuring the measurables of this, it's really, we would understand it as being measured at the community level, and with social science, arts-based research, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to come up with defined measurables, and the ways in which measurables have been expressed to us have been, intergenerational communication, right? People coming, seeing the videos and possibly going to an elder and saying, oh, can you help me? Like, how do you butcher the seal so that you don't, like, how do you get around the shoulder blade, or things like that. So we are hearing about these forms of measurables. So, and of course they're a little fluid and flexible, and will be defined as these relationships evolve. Research relationships within the team, but then also more generally in terms of advocacy work that's being done.